It is 9 o'clock, so I will call this special meeting of the Council of Fundy Albert for December 27th, 2023 to order. The first order of business is the adoption of the agenda. The agenda was circulated in advance of this meeting. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated, please? So moved by Councillor Jonas, seconded by Councillor Elderkin. Any questions on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? The motion's carried unanimously. Conflict of interest declarations. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare in relation to this morning's meeting?
No.
There being none, we'll proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is the year-end resolutions. They're of a financial nature. So there are a number of year-end resolutions that are required to be adopted prior to the end of this calendar year, which is our fiscal year. So we'll proceed with them in the order that they were provided to you. The first is a resolution for the Hillsborough Utility Operating Reserve Bank Account. May I have someone to read that, please?
Whereas the Hillsborough Utility, a Fundy Albert Utility, where the Hillsborough Utility, a Fundy Albert Utility does not have an operating reserve bank account, be it resolved that a bank account be opened for the Hillsborough Utility Operating Reserve. Moved by myself.
So moved by Councillor Jonah. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Elderkin. Any questions on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
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 Opposed, if any? Motion's adopted unanimously. Second resolution is the 2023 transfer to Hillsborough Operating Reserve. May I have someone read that, please?
Whereas $110,000 was to be put in the Hillsborough Utilities Operating Reserve for Hillsborough Water Exploration. And whereas legislation only allows 5% of your previous year's budgets be invested in operating reserves. And whereas Hillsborough's Utilities Fund allow for the transfer to be completed, be it resolved that $46,000 be transferred to the Hillsborough Utility Operating Reserve. Moved by myself.
So moved by Councillor Jonah. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Elderkin. Any questions on the motion?
Just John here for clarification that this is moving money from the Hillsborough Utility General Operating Fund to the new Hillsborough Utility Operating Reserve Fund, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Arrow.
Okay.
So that is to allow $46,000 to be set aside for the phase one of the hill, at some point, the phase one of the Hillsborough water exploration.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
And that's adopted unanimously. Thank you very much.
Jeff is on his way.
Resolution, the third resolution, which is the 2023 transfer to Hillsborough Capital Reserve. Where it is a requirement, oh, sorry, may I have someone to read that, please?
I'll take this one. Whereas it is a requirement under the former Village of Hillsborough's agreement under the Canada New Brunswick Rural Infrastructure Fund to establish a replacement reserve fund, which will be maintained for future replacement of various short life capital items that would be above and beyond ordinary maintenance and minor repairs to the new lagoon. And whereas $4,000 was to be transferred to this fund over the course of 10 years, and with this year being the 10th and final year. And whereas it is budgeted to transfer $5,500 to Hillsborough's Utility Capital Reserve, be it resolved that $5,500 be transferred to Hillsborough's Utilities Capital Reserve.
So moved by Councillor Elderkin. Is there a seconder on that motion? Nope, seconded by Councillor Ward Russell. Any questions on this motion?
It's John here again. The question is where is the money coming from?
It's coming
Most,
from,
the motion doesn't say where the money's coming from, I don't think.
It's from the Hillsborough Utility Reserve, Hillsborough Utility Operating Fund, Counselor Arrow. And every year for the past 9 years, there was a requirement that had been set by government that we set aside a $40,000 reserve for any capital maintenance issues that came up with the newly constructed lagoon. There was a requirement to do that. This is the 10th and final year. The requirement was for $4,000 a year for 10 years, but given that our budget allows for $5,500, they're putting an extra $1,500 into that utility capital reserve.
So should the motion actually say specifically where the money, it specifically says the amount and where it's going to, but it doesn't specifically say where it's coming from? Should that
If
be
you
in there?
would- If you would like to amend the motion, but just indicate where you would like the words inserted, please.
And it just, I think I've got this right. So it's the final line.
Mhm.
Be it resolved that $5,500 be transferred from the Hillsborough Utility General Operating Fund to the Hillsborough Utility Capital Reserve Fund. Is that correct?
Yes,
That would be it then.
so there's an amendment, and it was Councillor Elderkin, are you okay with that friendly amendment?
Yes.
And Councillor Lloyd Russell? You're all right with it? So on the
Yes.
amended motion, any other questions on that motion? On that amended motion, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimously. The next one is a resolution, Riverside Albert Utility Operating Reserve Bank Account. Would somebody be so kind as to read that, please?
Whereas Riverside Albert Utility of Fundy Albert Utility does not have an operating bank account, be it resolved that a bank account be opened for the Riverside Albert Utility Operating Reserve.
Moved by Councillor Elderkin, is there a seconder on that motion?
Ron?
Yep. Councillor Arrow. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimously. The next resolution is the 2023 transfer to Riverside Albert Utility Operating Reserve. Would someone be so kind as to read that motion, please?
Whereas it was budgeted that $7,848 and $4,320 totaling $12,168 be transferred to the Riverside Albert's Utilities Operating Reserve for water and wastewater respectively. And whereas Riverside Utilities funds allow for the transfer to be completed, be it resolved that $12,168 be transferred to the Riverside Albert Utility Operating Reserve.
So moved by Councillor Elderkin. Is there a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Jonah. Any discussion on the motion?
It's John here. This one is a bit better in that the second line says that the utility fund allows, meaning it has the money, I guess, for the transfer to be completed. I believe that these motions should be specific in where the money is coming from and where the money is going to. So I'm suggesting that the last line be amended to read as follows. Be it resolved that $12,168 be transferred from the Riverside Albert Utility General Operating Fund to the Riverside Utility Operating Reserve Fund. If that is correct.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Arrow. Councillor Elderkin, are you okay with that friendly amendment?
Yes.
And Councillor Jonah?
Yes.
Great. Any further questions on the amended motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. The next motion is the resolution 2023 transfer to Riverside Albert Utility Capital Reserve. Would someone be so kind as to read that motion, please?
Whereas it was budgeted that $14,229 be transferred to Riverside Albert Utility Capital Reserve. And whereas Riverside Albert Utilities funds allow for the transfer to be completed. Be it resolved that $14,229 be transferred to Riverside Albert's Utility Capital Reserve.
So moved by Counselor Jonah. Is there a second on that motion? Seconded by Counselor Land. Any questions on the motion? If not,
John here, I would still
yeah,
like,
go ahead, Counselor Arrow.
I suggest that the final sentence be amended to read as follows. Be it resolved that $14,229 be transferred from the Riverside Albert Utility General Operating Fund to the Riverside Albert Utility Capital Reserve Fund.
Amended by Counselor Arrow. Counselor Jonah, are you all right with that friendly amendment?
Yeah.
And Counselor Land, are you okay with that friendly amendment? Yes. Any further questions? Not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
All in favor, it's adopted unanimously. The next motion is the 2023 Alma Fire Department cashable GIC purchase. Would someone be so kind as to read that motion, please?
Whereas the Alma Fire Department has a projected year-end surplus of $17,000, and whereas $5,000 was budgeted to be transferred to their reserve, be it resolved that $22,000 be used to purchase a cashable GIC.
So moved by Counselor Land. Is there a seconder on that motion?
Yeah, John here.
Counselor Arrow, you're seconding the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
I just have a question, as John here again, is that, so in the previous ones, the transfers were going into reserve funds. In this case, the transfer is going into a GIC, an investment vehicle.
Correct.
Why, is anybody able to explain why we're using these different mechanisms? I just don't understand, and I'm curious to know.
I think if I understand correctly, and Counselor Elderkin, you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong here, but that was a practice of the former village of Riverside Albert, was to purchase cashable GICs rather than put money into reserve fund. The GICs are mostly an investment, and the cashable nature of a GIC is it is liquid. And that is the only explanation I can provide, Counselor Arrow.
That has been the practice in the former village of Riverside Albert for some reserves.
And Counselor Arrow, the only other thing I can say is perhaps that question should have been asked before today. And if no one is in favor of adopting that motion, then we should park it and get some clarification from our treasurer. And then we'll have to meet again before December 31st. This is the whole idea of the total amounts of 5,000, 5,000, and 5,000, because there's three very similar ones. That is well, it's not a requirement, but the way our transition facilitator had set things up was that there was to be 15,000 in reserves that were set up in the budgeting process for 2023. We can, if there's no appetite to move forward, then we can just wait and get some clarification and look at what the various options are. And if not, you know, we can either adopt the resolution as is or wait.
Or
Well,
is the answer that the GIC is actually going into the reserve of, does each fire department have its own reserve fund?
Yes,
So it's a GIC that's, so that's just, instead of cash, it's a GIC that's being transferred into the fire department reserve fund then.
well, it's to my knowledge, John, and I'm only speaking in previous history. I think you recall that the Riverside Albert Fire Department did some work this year. That money was sat in their GIC. So they cashed that in to make the payment. And that's how I think they keep track of the firemen's GICs. To me, there's, whether it's parked in a bank account or parked in a GIC, the money is parked and it's been identified for what it's for.
I could be wrong, but I do not believe that by purchasing a GIC, it would be in the name of the Alma Volunteer Fire Department, but I don't believe it would be considered a reserve per se. It's an investment vehicle. I could be wrong, but I don't believe I am. Because I don't believe there is a fire department capital reserve for each former municipality. I think each former municipality would likely have a capital reserve, but it would have to be specifically identified for the fire department, which is why I think the suggestion of purchasing GICs. If you look back at the number of GICs that the former village of Riverside Albert had,
Yeah.
Councilor Avery, you'll see
Yeah.
that they had quite a number of them.
Yeah, I do recall that.
Yeah. And I
The
think that's
good
all
thing
it is.
about it is that it's very clear when you're purchasing a GSC what it's for, right?
Correct.
It's done for a specific reason. It's not all in one bank account to be divided. When they purchase the GIC, it's for the fire department. In this case, it's Elma.
Correct. And there's two other ones that are coming that are very similar. Does that answer your questions, Councilor Arrow?
I think so. I guess good enough for now.
All right. So, any other questions on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
I,
Aye.
Opposed, if any, motion's carried unanimously. Next resolution is a similar one for the 2023 Hillsborough Fire Department Reserve Transfer. Can I have someone read that, please?
Whereas the Hillsborough Fire Department has a projected year-end surplus of $22,000, and whereas $5,000 was budgeted to be transferred to the Hillsborough Fire Department's reserve, be it resolved that $27,000 be used to purchase a cashable GIC.
So moved by Councilor Elderkin. Is there a seconder on that motion? So seconded by Councilor Land. Any questions on the motion? Again, similar to the first one, this is for the $5,000 and it's to purchase a cashable GIC, but it's for the former village of Hillsborough Fire Department. And in this case, $27,000 is to be invested in a cashable GIC. Any questions on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by stating aye.
I,
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried unanimously. The next resolution is, and last one, is a resolution for the 2023 Riverside Albert Fire Department Reserve Transfer. May I have someone read that motion, please?
Whereas $5,000 was budgeted to be transferred to the Riverside Albert Fire Department's reserve, be it resolved that $5,000 be transferred to the Riverside Albert Fire Department's reserve.
Now, this one is, well, I'll look, we have Councilor Elderkin move that. May I have a seconder on that motion, please? Seconded by Councilor Jonah. Any questions on the motion before I say anything? So this one's a little different, Councilor Eric. In that this is not to purchase a cashable GIC, this one is to transfer to the Riverside Albert Fire Department Reserve.
okay.
So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
Well, how is it different in the sense that, so why were we buying GICs in the previous ones, but here we're not buying a GIC?
I do not know the answer to your question.
Okay, that's the first question I have. The second question I have linked to this is that the previous two, what we were doing was we were taking 5,000 that had already been budgeted to be transferred to the reserve and adding that to a projected year-end surplus And those two amounts equaled what the motion entailed.
Correct.
In this particular case, there's no projected year-end surplus being transferred. And I wonder why, because we were provided information from the treasurer that indicates that the Riverside Albert Fire Department also has a projected year-end surplus similar to the number different though than the other two departments. Does anybody here know why this is only the 5,000 and not a projected year-end surplus as well?
I can answer that one. I think they did a large purchase in the month of December with, were they air packs, Mayor? I don't have the right terminology here for the fire department, but they
Correct.
needed something to be able to enter house fires, whatever that is. And it was a large sum of money. So when they got their year-to-date budget, they budgeted for so many from this year and so many from next year. And that would have used up the balance of their budget for this year.
Okay.
Okay. That would be correct, but I don't know the answer to your first question, Councillor Arrow, other than perhaps, and I'm only surmising that the amount is so small that it wouldn't be the purchase of a GIC, but rather just transferred into reserve. I don't know the answer to your question.
And
Yeah.
I don't know the answer either, Councillor Arrow, except that the former Village of Riverside, Albert, already probably has a GIC, a cashable GIC. So she may not be purchasing one as opposed to just adding to the one that's already existing. It would be my guess, but I can't confirm or deny that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Arrow? In kind of, in sort of.
Good enough, I guess, is
All right. Any other questions? On the motion that was presented, all in favor signify by stating aye.
I
Opposed, if any? The motion's carried unanimously. Those are the end of that's the end of the year-end resolutions. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
So moved by Councillor Jonah. So thank you very much. I'm just going to turn the recording off.